Welcome back to another Swordmaster Publications presentation. My name is Ernie Lawrence, and today we're going to be starting into the books of history. Of course, we're going to begin with Joshua. This takes place right after the death of Moses, right after the end of the writing of the Pentateuch, or the Law of Moses, or the Torah, as some people call it. And this chronicles the going into and the taking of the Promised Land. Now, a lot of people have a struggle with the promise that God made. They say that it was never fulfilled, that it was something that we're still waiting for the fulfillment of. These are usually people who believe in a future literal 1,000-year reign of Christ, and they need that land promise to not be fulfilled for their doctrines to be true. And we're going to show that as we go through the book of Joshua, that all of the promises that God made concerning the promised land were fulfilled in the book of Joshua. And in fact, the promises to Abraham about his people numbering as the stars of heaven, as the sands on the seashore, these were also declared fulfilled. Already we've seen that in the book of Numbers about the number of people fulfilling that promise. But we're going to see all of that kind of culminate here in Joshua as we go through the book. And then at the end of the book of Joshua, we're going to see a kind of a settling down into the land and a finishing up of that idea of God gives them the land and they go in and possess it. Note here too that and when we study the Old Testament, we study the nature of God. And even though the Old Testament doesn't have any spiritual authority over us today, like we can't live by it and be saved. We can't be held accountable to its laws or any of that, those kinds of things. There is a lot of value in studying the Old Testament. Number one, it is absolutely necessary to study the Old Testament to know and understand anything of any kind of depth whatsoever about the New Testament. But also, we learn a lot about the nature of God and the nature of mankind when we study the Old Testament. And so one of the things we're going to learn about here is that God has given the people the land. He talks about that over and over. I have given you this land. I have given you this land. But note that the people still had to go in and possess it. They had to go in and wage war. They had to go in and either eradicate or push out the people who were already living there, these wicked nations that lived there that were sacrificing their children and those kinds of things. So when we when we look at this in the Old Testament and we see that God gives us gifts, gives mankind gifts, but he still requires something on our part in order to take possession of those gifts. There's no way that the things that God gives to us are things that we could attain on our own. There's no way that I could say, God is given grace. He's given his son. He's given the New Testament. There's no way I could have come up with the New Testament on my own. No human could have come up with that on their own. No human could have paid the price that Christ paid, even if they lived a sinless life, which I believe is possible. Living a sinless life would not have been sufficient because that person is just human, where Jesus was both human and divine and was able to bridge that gap and be the mediator between God and mankind. And that's what was necessary. We could not have done that on our own. And so as we look at the book of Joshua, we look at we look back at the book of Numbers. Remember when the 12 spies went in, they saw that the people who lived there were big. They were powerful. They had giants. They had these big stone walls. We're going to read about Jericho and all of these fortifications. There is no way that the Israelites, even numbering as they do, about 2 million people, there is no way that they could have gone in and possessed the land on their own. And they recognize that. But God has said, I have given you the land. Go in and take possession of it. And that's a very important point to understand about this book and about the nature of God. So let's get started into it. Joshua chapter 1, starting in verse 1. Now after the death of Moses, the servant of Jehovah, it came to pass that Jehovah spake unto Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' minister, saying, Moses my servant is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, thou and all this people, unto the land which I do give to them, even to the children of Israel. So Moses has died. God is acknowledging that Joshua is going to be his successor as kind of the shepherd. Remember, Moses was even called the king, and so Joshua is stepping into this role of the leader of the people as they march into the promised land. And Joshua was one of those two faithful spies, Joshua and Caleb, who had gone into the land and said, yeah, we can take it. Yeah, of course they're bigger than we are, but God's on our side. We can take it. And so Joshua is tasked with fulfilling the thing that he believed that they could do with God's help. And this is his reward, is to be the person to do that. And Caleb's right there alongside of him. So anyway, he says, my servant is dead. Now go over this Jordan, talking about the river, you and all your people, unto the land which I do give them, even to the children of Israel. So see, God's given them this land. It's a gift that he is giving to them, but they still have to go in and possess it. And they can only do that with God's help. Verse 3, every place that the sole of your foot shall tread upon, that have I given unto you, as I said unto Moses. So here God is going to define again some of the borders of the promised land. We're going to talk about the Euphrates on the north, and then we're going to talk about the Great Sea, or the Mediterranean, all the way over in the west. Just wherever they were to go in and conquer, wherever God would lead them to conquer, that would be their land. And of course, they've already conquered land on this side of the Jordan, which we're going to read about here in just a moment. It says, verse 4, from the wilderness and this Lebanon. Okay, the wilderness, again, I've talked about this in past videos. I believe that the wilderness that they wandered in was the Saudi Arabian boot. It was not the Sinai Peninsula. I believe that the Red Sea that they crossed was crossing from the Sinai Peninsula into Saudi Arabia. And I think this is another one of those pieces of evidence for that, is that from the wilderness is Saudi Arabia to the east, and Lebanon and all of this area over in the eastern side on this side of the Jordan. I think that's what he's talking about. And so from the wilderness in this Lebanon, even unto the great river, the river Euphrates, the great river, that is very, very important in the texts of the Jews. Anything that you read about in terms of the Jews and their being conquered because of their unfaithfulness in future texts, you're going to see the Euphrates has a big, big role to play in that. And again, we see that in Revelation as well. I also firmly believe that when you look at the more apocalyptic text that has the symbolic words and phrases and visions and imagery and all of that is built on a concrete foundation, an anchor in reality, if you will. So when we get to like the sun, moon, and stars being metaphorical for rulers and the high priest and the Sanhedrin council and all of that, when we talk about those heavenly bodies as metaphor, they are anchored in the reality of the actual big ball of gas burning 146 million kilometers away, or the big rock that orbits the earth, or the stars that we see up in the night sky. Those are literal things. And so here we have the literal Euphrates as a border to the promised land. And the river Euphrates becomes a very central figure in the books of prophecy. And it's important to understand what role that river plays. So pay attention to that. It is the northern border of the promised land. And it says all the land of the Hittites. The Hittites are an interesting group of people because for the longest time, the Hittite people were thought to be a myth. It was one of those things that the quote-unquote Bible made up. And it wasn't, I believe it was in the 20th century that architects dug up evidence of the Hittite people, that they found the evidence for these people. And it was one of those archaeological things that once again proved the Bible to be historically accurate in its nature. And the Bible has never been shown to be historically inaccurate. There's nothing in the Bible that you can say, well, this was true, the Bible says this. Those are absolutely contradictory. In every case, there has been either at best missing information, like the Hittite people, where there just wasn't any evidence of them yet, or you have a discrepancy in the way that mankind has kept his calendars. A big one of those is the Egyptian calendars. The Egyptian calendars are all wonky when you look at them. They don't line up at all, and people are completely confused about when the pyramids were built and what pharaoh was in power at what time and when were the Hebrew people in the land of Egypt and all that. It's because they don't look at the Egyptian calendars right. That's not the Bible's problem. That's the people who were looking at history using very, very bad dating methods. And that happens actually quite a bit. And by the time they get those things resolved, it turns out that the Bible was once again historically accurate. In fact, the Bible is so historically accurate, obviously being inspired by God, we can use that as the touchstone, as the anchor for chronology, and we can look at history, human history, all the way back to the very beginning of time, and we can say, all right, the Bible says this, so this must be true. Now, how do we look at archaeology, and how do we look at these other dates that we don't have lined up right? How do they fit in? And we can actually find a better, correct human history and human chronology by anchoring it to the Bible as an absolute truth. And the Hittites is just one example of that. And then it says, and unto the great sea, toward the going down of the sun. So that's the west, that's the Mediterranean, that shall be your coast. And so we have this three of the borders here. We have the wilderness and Lebanon on the east, we have the Euphrates in the north, and we have the Mediterranean Sea on the west. All of that was going to be the borders of the promised land. Verse 5, there shall not any man be able to stand before you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not fail you nor forsake you. So God is very pleased with Joshua. He's pleased with Joshua the whole time. And he says, I will always be with you. I will never forsake you. I will not fail you. No one will be able to stand before you all the days of your life. And by proxy, of course, that means they won't be able to stand against Israel. And Joshua, when we look at the Old Testament, and we look starting in Exodus, and we look at the Israelite nation, there were a lot of dark spots. There were some bright spots. Joshua and Caleb was one. Moses was one. But when you look at their history over the past 41 years since they left Egypt, there's a lot of dark. There's a lot of whining, and I've talked about how much of the brats they were. When you look at the book of Joshua is one of those generations of the Israelites that is a shining testament to what they should have been. If they had done what they did in the book of Joshua for the next 1500 years or so, then Israel would have been amazing. I think they would have had a different portion in the scheme of things, because if they had been that faithful, then God would have continued to reward them. But they don't. So we're going to look at Joshua, and we're going to look at Israel at one of its high points. And it's going to be interesting to see them here and remember them for this. But then we're going to move into Judges, and it all just over and over again. So, be strong and of good courage, for unto this people shall you divide for an inheritance the land which I swear unto their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, that you may observe to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Turn not from it to the right or the left, that you may prosper whithersoever you go. So, be strong, have courage, and do all the law. Do all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. So they were supposed to follow all the law. They didn't get to pick and choose. They had to do all of it. I want to note here that when we look at the book of Moses in the text is never broken up into ceremonial laws and dietary laws and civil laws and moral laws and all of the different categories that people try to put on the law of Moses. God here views the law of Moses as a singular whole in its totality. And we see that in the New Testament. James talks about this. If you wanted to keep any part of the law, you had to keep the whole law. And if you offend in one part of the law, you have violated the law. It is a singular whole. The people like the Torah observant movement right now are really big. They're modern day Judaizers. They're coming in and they say, well, we don't keep the priesthood because we can't sacrifice animals in the temple because there's no temple, and we don't do this part of it because of this, and we don't do that part of it because, but we're going to keep the dietary laws and the Sabbath. Well, you're viewing the law in a way that the Bible never presents the law of Moses, and they won't even they'll jump on you when you say the law of Moses. It's not the law of Moses. It's God's law. It's the law of Moses. The Bible calls it the law of Moses. We're going to see that in the book of Joshua several times, and it's just one book. There's multiple places where it's called the law of Moses. But even here in verse 7, do according to all the law which Moses, my servant, commanded you. Who commanded them? Well, ultimately it was God. But God says, do all the law which Moses commanded you. So it is the law of Moses. It's the law that Moses commanded them, and they were to keep all of it as a unified whole, not bits and pieces broken up into all these different things. Oh, it's okay if you break a ceremonial, but you got to keep the moral. It's okay if you break the dietary, but you got to keep this part of the law. No, it doesn't work that way. It is the law of Moses, singular, unified whole. So, all right, verse 8. This book of the law, see again, singular book of the law, shall not depart out of your mouth, but you shall meditate therein day and night, that you may observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then you shall make thy way prosperous, and then you shall have good success. So if they did all of the law, not just the bits and parts they wanted to, not just the bits and parts that were convenient, but if they did all that is written therein, then they would make their way prosperous. Now, remember, included in that is if they sinned, there was atonement that they could make for that. They could offer the blood of bulls and goats, and they could push that sin forward, looking towards the cross and all of that. But God says, if you follow all the law, then your way would be made prosperous. And as long as they did that, which we're going to see in the book of Joshua, God does indeed make them prosperous because of their obedience. Have not I commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Be not afraid, neither be dismayed, for Jehovah your God is with you wherever you go. And he iterates to Joshua his name. Jehovah, the great I am, the self-existent one, your God is the one true and living God. And I will be with you wherever you go. And in saying that, in saying Jehovah your God, he reminds Joshua of all of the things that Joshua has seen the one true and living God do. He saw all of the plagues of Egypt, all of the wonders that God did there. He saw the parting of the Red Sea and the crossing on dry land. He saw the cloud and the pillar of fire and the tabernacle and the things that were seen in the wilderness with the manna and the quail and the fiery serpents and the bronze serpent lifted up, and all of the things that God had done. When he says, I am Jehovah your God, I will do what I said I will do, Joshua has witnessed all of that. And so that in itself is bolstering to Joshua just to hear Jehovah God. And when we hear Jehovah God, when we talk about this specific one true and living God, the creator of the universe, it should have the same effect. Because if we truly believe everything that we read about in the Bible, we know that God did all of those things. And if God says he's going to do these things for us moving forward, that if we are faithful to Jesus Christ, his son, then this is what God is going to do. Then just hearing the name of God, just hearing Jehovah, or just hearing Jesus Christ, that should bolster us. It should strengthen our courage, and it should strengthen us to not only have faith, but to be able to defend the gospel, to go out and preach the word, and go out and conquer, just the way that Joshua did here. And really that's a good way to look at the book of Joshua, from the New Testament perspective and from the current perspective of us, just as an application. And again, when we read the Bible, you must read it and understand it from its prime audience first. But as we read this and we see the type-antitype relationships, as I talk about all the time, Joshua being promised to be successful in going out and conquering the land, we too have been told that if we are going out and conquering for the kingdom of Christ, we're going out and planting the seed, that God will give the increase. It's not our job as Christians to give the increase. We preach the gospel. It's going to fall on different kinds of soils. We know that. That's not our job to worry about the soil. God worries about the soil. We sow the seed. We go out and we fight the good fight. God gives the increase. And that's exactly what's happening here. Is Joshua's going in. He's going to be strong. He's going to be courageous. He's going to go fight the fight. And God is going to give the increase. He's going to give the victory. Verse 10, Then Joshua commanded the officers of the people, saying, Pass through the host, and command the people, saying, Prepare you victuals, for within 3 days you shall pass over this Jordan, to go in to possess the land which Jehovah your God gives you to possess it. And so Joshua says, here's the command, we're leaving in 3 days, get all your food ready for the battle. We're going to be heading out. And he reminds them that Jehovah God, same thing that God just did for him, Jehovah your God is giving this land to you for you to possess. He reminds them of that. Go tell, and he says, captains, go tell everybody. And so they do. And then he says, to the Reubenites and to the Gadites and to the half the tribe of Manasseh, Joshua spoke, saying, Remember the word which Moses, the servant of Jehovah, commanded you, saying, Jehovah your God has given you rest and has given you this land. So they've already got their land. Your wives, your little ones, and your cattle shall remain in the land which Moses gave you on this side Jordan. But you shall pass before your brethren armed, all the mighty men of valor, and help them. Remember the entreaty that these tribes they gave to Moses. They said, we've conquered these lands, we like these lands, we want these lands. We don't necessarily want to have lands over on the other side of the Jordan. And Moses said, okay. No. Moses said, are you crazy? Do you remember what happened with the spies not going in and saying we could conquer? Are you trying to provoke the wrath of God? That's what Moses told them. And they said, hey, no. Tell you what, we want these lands. We like these lands. We're going to leave our women and our children and our cattle and all the things here. We're going to leave them. But we are going to go first in all of the fighting. Because if God gives us this land that we want, then we will be the forefront, the vanguard, the ones that go to the first of every battle, and we will fight. And so Joshua is now reminding them of that. He says, remember what you told Moses, that you were going to go to the forefront. Your wives, your little ones, and your cattle shall remain in the land which Moses gave you on this side Jordan. But you shall pass before your brethren. You're going to go first, armed, all the mighty men of valor, and help them, until Jehovah has given your brothers rest, as he has given you. And they also have possessed the land which Jehovah your God gives them. And I want to make this point very clear, because this is so powerful when dealing with those who believe that this promise was never fulfilled. These men of valor, remember, this is the second generation that came out of Egypt. They were all under the age of 20 or possibly not even born when the golden calf was built. And so these guys are young, they're vital, they're powerful, they've got wives, they've got children, and they're at best middle-aged. And Joshua tells them, you will be at the forefront until we're done. Until he gives your brothers rest, as he has given you, and they have possessed the land which Jehovah your God has given them. These guys didn't get to come home to their families to their land, to work their promised land, until they had accomplished all that God had promised. The way that Joshua presents this, and this is as powerful as it gets in terms of understanding the prime audience. When we read Joshua's words here to them, we must understand that these guys don't get to come home until they finish everything that God set them to do. When they conquered the entirety of the promised land, then they would get to come home to their families. Now, either God is a liar, or the promise was fulfilled and they conquered all that God had given them to conquer. Those are the only two choices there are. It says, then you shall return unto the land of your possession and enjoy it, which Moses, Jehovah's servant, gave to you on this side Jordan toward the sun rising in the east. And so we know from the very outset of Joshua that God has given them this land. God is all powerful. He's able to do this. And these men did come home to enjoy their land, to enjoy their families. And they do it in an actual reasonable amount of time. We're going to see the time period that this takes to accomplish. And when we see at the end of Joshua that all this gets accomplished, that these guys get to go home, we can know that the Israelites have possessed the land which Jehovah their God had given them. They answered Joshua, saying, all that you command us we will do, and whithersoever you send us we will go. According as we hearkened unto Moses in all things, so will we hearken unto you. Only Jehovah your God be with you as he was with Moses. And so they say, yes, we agree. We are going to keep our word. We're going to do all that God has asked us to do through Moses. The only thing is we ask that God continue to be with you as he was with Moses. They want that victory as long as they're faithful to God. And then verse 18, whosoever he be that does rebel against your commandment and will not hearken unto your words and all that you command him, he shall be put to death. Insubordination is met with swift destruction. And imagine that. Imagine what happens to these guys who are going to the forefront here. They're going to fight this battle as the vanguard. One of them decides in his heart, I don't want to do this. I'm done. I'm not going to keep my word anymore. He's not only going against God and finding death for himself, but think about what he's doing for his family that's back home. Think about the consequences that they face because this man rebelled and was put to death for it. And so it ends here, only be strong and of a good courage. That's how this opening to Joshua ends. It's a strong message. If anybody doesn't keep their word that we gave to Moses, that we gave to Jehovah God, about us being in the vanguard and going first in front of all our brethren, if anyone doesn't do all that you command, Joshua, that man needs to be put to death. But be strong and of good courage. And it's an excellent message, and it's an excellent opening to this first book of history that we're going to read here. And I'm looking forward to this. I've read through Joshua a couple of times. It's been a while. But I've never gone through it this way before, with this kind of depth and this kind of focus. We're going to continue to look at all the same things, the type, antitypes, relationships. How does this look forward to the first century when Christ comes? Because all things in the Old Testament point to Christ. And we're going to see all of that in the book of Joshua just as much as we saw in the book of in the books of Moses. One thing I want to focus on here, in the books of history, we're shifting away from Moses as a type of Christ and a look at Jesus personally, because a lot of the laws point to Jesus specifically. We're going to shift away from that, and we're going to look more at the Israelite nation. And the Israelite nation is a type pointing forward to spiritual Israel, which is the church. And we're going to look at the parallels of Israel as compared to the church. And when we get to the book of Revelation, of course, we see that parallel. We see the bride versus the whore. And that comparison is going to be made a lot in this type-antitype relationship. So keep that in mind also as we go through the book of Joshua, the idea of how does Israel typify the church of the first century going forward. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to discussions and any questions that you may have. And you can leave those in the comments here, or you can contact me through social media or whatever other ways you have to do that. And I look forward to our conversations there. My name is Ernie Lawrence Jr., and this has been another Swordmaster Publications presentation.